coronavirus crisis by lowering its main interest rate by 0.5 point. The Daily Star echoes the Prime Minister's calls for the public to carry on as normal. And Caroline Flack's prosecution by the CPS is to be reviewed by the organisation after claims that it pursued a show trial. And that's the main story for the Daily Mirror. So Jenny Kleeman and Mark Wallace here with me tonight. And coronavirus dominating the headlines once again. And you've picked out the Daily Mail's coverage, first of all. Life on hold for 3 months. And really, this is in the worst-case scenario, isn't it?
It is, and you wouldn't necessarily get that from looking at these front pages. I'm not a fan of Boris Johnson, but I would say that today, in the press conference today, and with the Chief Medical Officer, he was quite measured and was careful to say that this is a worst-case scenario. At the moment, we just need to be washing our hands. However, it's not necessarily being reported that way because a lot of the details that came out today are very eye-catching and very splashy, and all the newspapers know because they measure the metrics on their websites. The most read stories are the ones about coronavirus, so everybody is going to town about it. And today, because of the briefing, there really was new information to go to town on. And you'll see throughout all of the front pages, there are different aspects of the briefing that have captured the imaginations, made different headlines. Potentially, in a worst-case scenario, you could have 1 in 5 workers off work. You could have 1 in 7 people over 80 dying. You could have life on hold for 3 months. You could have most crimes going uninvestigated by the police. We are quite a way off that. But what did come from the briefing today was, 2 things for me. One was, I think there is an assumption by the government that containment can only go so far.
We're still in that phase.
We're still in that phase, but we are trying to delay it for the summer months when the NHS will be better equipped to help. But the NHS is not going to be able to cope to an extent where you have people who have pre-existing conditions who need specialist care, and you're going to have intensive care units that are going to be overwhelmed. And I feel very much for these people who are so often dismissed as, it's people who have lung conditions, people who have cardiovascular problems, people who have diabetes, kidney problems. They're the ones who are really going to suffer from this, as a way of reassuring the rest of us who don't have those conditions. But a large number of people do have those conditions, and it must be terrifying to have, your situation thrown around as a way of reassuring everybody else, like, as if there's some kind of Malthusian thing going on, which really, really does worry me. But yes, it was a worst-case scenario, but it's not being reported this way.
And I think one really interesting thing about this, one really important thing about this, you can see reflected in the coverage in tomorrow's newspapers, is that at this stage of an emerging pandemic, virus travelling around the world, where there are ways in which modern medicine can help to support patients, help to treat patients and improve survival rates, hopefully. But there isn't a vaccine expected anytime very soon. Actually, information and the media and these very front pages we're looking at is a major weapon in what the government's calling its battle against COVID-19. And one reason for that is we all know that, we've put it ourselves, everybody's been trying to find out more information about this. You look at every newspaper website, gets all this traffic from people visiting, trying to find out. There have been various things going around social media and messaging apps, some of which are accurate, some of which are completely misleading. And actually having this information, yes, it's a potential worst-case scenario, being upfront to the people about what that could involve, but emphasising that it's not completely outside your control. We can all help to mitigate it. We can make it better or slower or less bad by even doing things like washing our hands more often and more thoroughly. It's really important that people understand that.
And we've moved on to the Daily Telegraph there, which picks out one of the other lines that you mentioned about 20% of all workers could be off sick at the same time, should it get to the worst case scenario. And this is a really difficult balancing act for the government, isn't it? They need people to trust authorities. They need to inform them, but they don't want to panic them, but they need to offer reassurance while at the same time as offering advice. It's quite a difficult line to tread, isn't it?
It is, and it's also dependent on people being honest. Containment is dependent on people being honest about who they've been in contact with and where they've been. And this whole idea of self-isolation, if you have a job where you're not going to get very much sick pay at all. You might get the £93, £94 a week statutory sick pay if you self-isolate, or you might not get very much at all, and you're relying on a salary to live off. Maybe you will be disinclined to be honest about who you've been in contact with or where you've been. And in order to really get on top of this, I think actually we haven't done very badly as a country so far in terms of containment. The assumption being that that's not going to be able to last, but we will be able to delay it longer if we are having people being able to self-isolate and not feeling like they're going to lose their jobs or their livelihood if they do.
I'm going to move us on just before you come to the next story, just so we can go through some of these other stories. Inside the Mail, you picked out the story about don't panic. I hope this kind of comes to something that you were about to say, but obviously that's the idea is to prevent people panicking too much. There was a sense of trying to carry on with your life as normal up to now, with the washing of hands and understandable precautions, but a sense that people already are trying to stock up on various items.
Yes, and in any given crisis or of any sort, but particularly something like this, you have some kind of tendency or some kind of risk of panic buying, particularly because it becomes self-reinforcing. People go to the shops, they see an empty shelf, they think, oh my gosh, what does somebody know that I don't?
Pictures like this won't help.
Pictures like this don't help that, but it's also the case that this is a particular aspect of this particular virus, in that because there's this period, quite a lengthy period, in which you might be infectious but without any symptoms, you could infect other people. And that's why, firstly, it's partially a question of being honest, as Jenny says, but there's a lot of people who don't even know that they might be infected. And that's why the self-isolation comes into play. The self-isolation, the idea of up to 2 weeks in your home without outside contact, makes people more likely to want to have not a stockpile, but literally just a stock for them to actually use in that time period. What I was going to say before was about this question of delay and actually managing the time period of an outbreak. If God forbid, it gets out beyond the containment phase, the delay phase is really important, because while it may still spread to potentially large numbers of people, if you can spread out the timescale in which people get ill, firstly, you help things like supply chains, you make sure stocks in the shops last better, you don't overwhelm hospitals in the same way, because you spread out. Even in the worst case scenario, if you have the same number of people who got infected, if you can do it over double the time, then your services will be better, people are better supported, you can treat people better, take care of them, and hopefully save
lives. And also push it into the summer months, which tend to have other illnesses less prominent in hospitals. Yeah. There's the Times front page, patients face video check as NHS plans virus wards, and there are various plans for the NHS, aren't there?
Yes.
That are going into place. One of them that we heard a little bit about yesterday was the suggestion that some people who'd recently retired might be encouraged to go back to work to help with numbers. But this suggestion of fewer face-to-face consultations,
which seems to make a lot of sense. Although obviously, I think some people will be much more comfortable using Skype or that kind of technology to talk to their doctors than others. Other details in here about the 2020 Games in Tokyo. It could be postponed. I think today that they were saying that wasn't going to happen.
I think the Olympic Committee has said it's going ahead as planned, but the Japanese Olympics minister suggested that possibly, or hinted that maybe it could be delayed.
Keep an open mind about these things. We don't know what's going to happen, and that any kind of mass gathering of people that's scheduled over the next 6 or 7 months, you have to be prepared to look at it again, I think.
Yeah, and the fact is that conventional expectations of life are going to change, at least in the short term, to some extent. And I don't know if anybody watching has tried stopping shaking hands with people, but that alone is quite a big... Yeah, I tried it a little bit today, and it's
an alternative move.
Normally it's slightly awkward, kind of over British. I'm not actually shaking hands, but then everyone changes what they're about to talk about and talks about elbow bumps or kicking toes or whatever instead. So actually, we're going to have to... the way our society works is going to change a little bit in the next few weeks. Hopefully not for too long, hopefully not too much, and hopefully soon we'll be able to change back. But we're in the very early stages of this.
I mean, I think that's right, isn't it? Isn't there a suggestion that things probably will get worse before they've got better? That's certainly what the Prime Minister was saying yesterday. Do you think that people are prepared to kind of to change the way they go about things, not least in terms of personal hygiene, in the next few months? Do you think people have got their heads around that?
I think people are. I mean, from what I have seen from people I know from the school WhatsApp group that I'm on, people seem to be really worried about all of this. There's a lot of quackery. There's a lot of misinformation. a lot of, the sort of people who wouldn't vaccinate their children, recommending all sorts of, I had seen people saying, you've got to drink hot lemon 3 times a day, all sorts of awful misinformation, which really we really need to stamp down on. But I don't think there are many people who don't think that this is serious. I don't know, I'm still shaking people's hands. But I am washing my hands, and I'm encouraging my children to wash their hands, and I think that's generally a good habit to be in anyway, I think.
And we just have to see how this progresses.
Yeah.
Just very briefly, there's the Guardian's front page. They're suggesting murder inquiries
Yeah,
to be
I
axed.
think this is quite a sensationalist front page, because the first paragraph, it says, police investigations into some homicides would be halted. I don't think anyone was saying that there are not going to be any murder inquiries in the worst case scenario.
And the reason for this is potentially a lot of police
we
might
have
be off
limited
sick.
resources, so they might be off sick, they might be drafted into I don't know, to deal with public emergencies that are more pressing.
Indeed. Plenty to watch out for, and as we say, we really don't know how it's going to play out at the moment. But we are going to take a break. I know that's going to happen. Coming up after the break, voters in 14 US states are deciding who they want to take on Donald Trump. We're going to be assessing the runners and riders after the break. And Mark Wallace. I don't know how super your Tuesday is, or has been. But it's pretty super in America. A double-page spread in The Times covers this big voting day, of course, called Super Tuesday, because 14 states are going to the polls. And it could be crucial in determining who, at least the front-runner is for that Democratic nominee.
The hope is that tomorrow we will know who is going to be going up against Donald Trump. And
we may not know that soon, of course.
We may not know that soon, but there is a sense that something definitive is going to happen. I don't think any of the candidates who are really in the running now are breathtakingly inspiring. Joe Biden has had this late surge. He was kind of written off early on in the proceedings, and he's sort of come back. And he is the moderate candidate. He is the person. Oh yeah, apparently it says here in the Times that they're calling him Joe Mentum, because the momentum is with him.
The Biden bounce, I've heard as well.
Yep. But he is the moderate candidate, with Bernie Sanders being painted as the kind of incredible socialist that he may or may not be. I mean, the two men sort of represent the kind of not just the ideological, but the generational split within the Democrats.
Although they're both pretty old.
They're both pretty old, but
a lot of young people
but
backing
Bernie Sanders is
yeah.
like the sort of Jeremy Corbyn and momentum. But yes, that's the other thing on this beautiful double-page spread about how incredibly old all these candidates are.
Yeah, and I've got to say, it's like Donald Trump. There's another round of voting from Donald Trump's favourite sleeper agent, the Democratic Party. I don't think, frankly, Trump as the incumbent could be getting a better help from an opposition than a process this drawn out, this inconclusive, and this boring. I mean, none of them, even the so-called firebrand isn't really setting the world on fire with what's happening with all this. I think there clearly is hope that there'll be some kind of resolution from Super Tuesday. I think people might have to keep hoping, unfortunately. I don't think if Sanders doesn't get his way, I don't think he'll quit and go home. If Biden doesn't get his way, I don't think he'll quit and go home either.
Elizabeth Warren, two females. But if she wins, she's 71.
There's Michael Bloomberg as well.
Yes.
As we talked about before, I'm no great Trump fan. I don't think he's a conservative. I think he has many, many, many downsides. I don't think any of these candidates are going to do very well against him.
I'm going to rush us on because I promised an hour ago to talk about smelly teenagers. So I'm not sure a lot of people have kept watching just for that reason. It's on the front page of the Telegraph, and it says whiff of teenagers blamed for family rifts.
Yes, there has been experiments, it doesn't say on this particular article, but apparently the reason why mothers fall out with their teenage offspring is because they stop liking the way they smell. Mothers like the smells of babies and small children, but not teenagers.
Nothing to do with the grumpiness, laziness,
Either
messiness.
deodorant.
Lynx is obviously not doing its job. They need to redouble their own research to fight back.
Anyway, on that bombshell, we are out of time, but good to see you as always. Thanks very much indeed.